Before beginning, I believe that we're going to try to end the meeting at 4:30 in the afternoon. Welcome to one and all on this 19th meeting of our committee. Today, we'll be hearing from witnesses for the first hour on Bill C-204, Mr. Scott Davidson's bill, sponsor. Then we will go to the clause-by-clause study of the bill. We have this afternoon appearing before the committee Ms. Helen Ryan. As we know well, she's a frequent flyer here, Danny Drouin, also known to us, and Nathalie Perron. With Global Affairs, we have Mr. Richard Tarasovsky. I don't know who would like to start first, but we'll get underway without further ado. And Madam Ryan, perhaps, would you like to lead? You have 5 minutes, madam. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, bonjour.
Deputy Minister, as we just heard, for the Ministry of the Environment. And I'm with the Environmental Protection Branch, and I'm with Environment and Climate Change Canada, and I'm accompanied today by my colleague, Danny Drouin, who's the Director General of the Plastics and Waste Management Directorate, Nathalie Perron, who's the Director of the Waste Reduction and Management Division, and I'm also accompanied by Richard Tarasovsky from Global Affairs Canada, and he's the Deputy Director of Ocean and Environmental Laws. And I'm pleased to participate in your study of Bill C-204 and inform the Committee of Canada's ambitious agenda to move forward towards zero plastic waste. The past several months have been very productive, and our efforts that will yield results both in Canada and internationally. The Government of Canada has a comprehensive plan to achieve zero plastic waste and eliminate plastic pollution. Through the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, we have a framework for joint action with provinces and territories with the goal of keeping plastics in the economy and out of the environment. The Canada-wide strategy on zero plastic waste as a two-phased action plan, the Canada-wide action plan on zero plastic waste, and it's aimed to support Canada's shift to a circular economy for plastics and contains actions that contribute to reaching the ambitious plastic waste reduction targets laid out in the Ocean Plastics Charter. Canada's plan is directly related to global actions aimed at improving plastic waste management and reducing plastic litter from entering the environment. A key element of our international action is to implement controls on the transboundary movement of plastic waste and to work with international community to ensure that our exports do not lead to pollution abroad. Canada has a robust legislative regime in place for controlling transboundary movement of waste and ensuring that controlled shipments crossing Canada's borders reach the intended destination and are managed so as to reduce releases of contaminants to the environment. The regime includes the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which is our cornerstone, which provides a range of tools to manage waste. It ensures that movement of waste controlled under Part 7, Division 8 of the Act cannot take place unless the minister is notified and a permit is issued for international exports. The PCB waste export regulations of 1996 set out controls on the export of waste containing PCB. The International Movement of Hazardous Waste Regulation controls the movement of hazardous waste and hazardous recyclable material between provinces through a tracking mechanism. And the Export and Import of Hazardous Waste and Hazardous Recycled Material Regulation implements Canada's international obligations, including those under the Basel Convention. These regulations control the export of any waste covered by the Basel Convention when exported to a Basel party. They also control waste that are defined as hazardous or waste prohibited by the importing country, even if the waste is not defined as hazardous in Canada. A cornerstone of CEPA and the regulation is to seek the consent of importing and transit countries for any export of these wastes from Canada before an export permit is issued. In providing their consent, the importing and/or transit country confirms that these wastes will be managed in an environmentally sound manner. On December 29, 2020, Canada accepted the plastic waste amendments adopted under the convention. These amendments strengthen controls on the transboundary movement of certain non-hazardous, non-recyclable plastic waste, such as mixed or contaminated plastic waste or certain resins, for instance, PVC, and clarify that hazardous plastic waste are covered by the convention. The concrete results of this acceptance is that since January 1st, 2021, an export permit is required for the export of plastic waste subject to the convention from Canada to a Basel party. This is a concrete and effective mechanism to ensure that exports of plastics waste covered by the convention take place only if the consent of the importing country has been obtained. These controls are only efficient if the regulated community complies with them. Accordingly, Environment and Climate Change Canada has an actively communicated with Canadian exports, ad hoc recyclers, and sorting facilities with respect to these new measures to ensure their awareness of the new controls that are in place.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from Environment Canada who will be speaking, or will it just be yourself?
It's just me that's speaking.
Okay, thank you. But everyone will be available for questions. Great.
So that's correct.
Yeah, perfect. So we'll go to Mr. Tarasovsky from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and Development. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. In fact, I have no opening statement.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm doing the only opening statement.
Okay, fine. Okay, so we'll go straight to questions. We're starting the 6-minute round with Mr. Generou.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was the most efficient opening statements I think we've heard here on this for a while. Do want to Miss Ryan, if I may. You talked a lot about in your opening statement about what your department's doing to ensure proper waste management, and then the regulations to control the export of any waste covered under the Basel Convention when exported to a Basel party. But as we know, the U.S. is not a member of the Basel Convention; they haven't ratified. The purpose then of the regulations is obviously to control the waste management. You state, and quoting here, in providing their members and you said there, I assume the members of the Basel Convention consent, the importing and or transit countries confirm that these wastes will be managed in an environmentally sound manner. Now, being that the U.S. and I'm sure other countries we export to do not have to follow the regulations, meaning that the waste can be mismanaged wherever they see fit. I'd like to know from your perspective, how much of Canada's plastic waste have we exported to the United States? Let's say in the last year.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. I should just note that while the United States is not subject to the Basel Convention, in order for Canada to ratify the Basel Convention, we had to enter into an arrangement with the U.S. In order to ensure the environmentally sound management of non-hazardous waste and scrap subject to the transboundary movement. And I will turn to Nathalie Perron to give you the specifics with respect to the amount going to the United States, but it is a significant portion of our material.
Yes, merci beaucoup. So yes, thank you. So between 2019 and 2020, we exported about 135,000 tons to the United States of all waste, all plastic waste, sorry.
Okay, so if I guess then let's take one step further. I was reading a quote from 10,000 Changes, which, as I'm looking at their website, is funded by your guys' department, where it says Canada exported 101,131 tons of plastic waste, and this is just in 2018. So your numbers are a little bit larger, Ms. Perron, only because obviously the scope to 2020. but much of it to American recycling brokers who then resell it over to overseas companies. So then once Canadian waste enters the US, it's not tracked to where it ends up is a mystery. So I guess how, even though they're not part of the Basel Convention, there's the signed agreements, there still seems to be that that mystery in terms of where the waste ends up. I'm hoping maybe Ms. Braun or Ms. Ryan could give us a sense of how we would go about tracking that, how we could get that that accurate number of how much of that waste is particular Canada's, because it sounds like it ends up in the Asian markets as well.
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So I would just like to point out that waste that is not disposed of in the United States and that is just in transit is subject to our regulation and does require an export permit. And so we track and monitor the material that's transited through the United States. And when it's captured when it's destined for a party that's a member of the Basel Convention, it's also excluded from our arrangements with the United States. So the company wanting to do so would require an export permit prior to the export. And this requirement is, again, one of the elements of us being able to and having accepted the Basel amendments. And I'll turn to Nathalie Perron to see if she has further information to add.
Merci, Hélène. No, that's very good. In fact, out of that number, a lot of it may be actually covered under our regulation, and as such would require a permit. And through the permit system, there's through the regulation, there's a tracking of the movement of the waste. And so for all those wastes that were exported through a permit, we do have information and we can track where it goes.
So 10,000 changes, when they say that it's a mystery, that's just not correct. Is that your opinion?
It's not correct for all the waste that is exported in the United States.
Okay. So how much money then has Canada had to spend for waste management, having to ship the waste back? And I recall the incident off of the I believe it was the Philippines a while back, where a large part of it was Canada's waste. Do you have an accurate dollar figure on what that would be?
So thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. With respect to we made changes to our regulation, which require that should a waste not be accepted in the receiving country, that it's the responsibility of the waste exporter to manage the return of the waste to Canada. With respect to the specifics on the waste containers that were exported to the Philippines between 2013 and 2014, a Canadian company exported containers labeled as recycled plastics to the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the export of the material at issue was not at the time regulated under Canadian law. It was exported, and then it was refused subsequently entry.
Yeah. But I think Mr. Generou was, we're way over time. So, but Mr. Generou was looking for a dollar figure. So if there isn't one, we can move on. If you have the dollar figure, you can share it.
I don't have the dollar figure at hand, but I can get the dollar figure for you and provide it to the committee.
Thank you. Mr. Longfield.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the witnesses for being here. We've been sorting through the, I guess in this study, when you talk about sorting, it can be taken a lot of different ways. But in this case, we're looking at the C204, as well as the amendments that have gone through that Canada has approved recently on the Basel Convention on plastics. And then we have the Canada-US agreement. So as a member of parliament, I'm trying to see what's missing in what we've been doing as a government with the Basel Convention and the US agreement, and what would be added by C204. Is there anything in 204 that we're not already addressing through the regulations and the agreements that we're currently working on?
Thanks for that question. I would say that our current regime controls the waste that are at question in an adequate fashion and provides for the measures with respect to the authorities under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and then subsequently under our existing regulations. And I'll turn to Nathalie Perron to see if there's anything further she would like to add.
I would say that based on our understanding of the bill, which covers only the final disposal, our legislation and legislative framework covers both final disposal and also recycling.
Thank you. And so it seems to me there might be a timing issue here, that at the time the private member's bill was being worked on, these other items had been in process for a while, but finally came through. What was the timing on us coming to our current arrangements that we have, and what's still outstanding for us to be able to get onto our agreements internationally?
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for that question. I think with respect to the Basel Convention, the Basel amendments on plastic waste, Canada accepted those amendments on December 29th of last year. So it's a very recent acceptance. And in order for Canada to have accepted that, we needed to enter into an arrangement with the United States. There had been discussions at the OECD to seek to find a solution for all OECD countries. That solution did not come forth, and so Canada subsequently negotiated an arrangement with the United States to ensure that we had the proper management of our waste that were destined to the United States, in order that we could accept the Basel plastic amendments. Those amendments, as I mentioned in my opening statements, took effect on January 1st.
Thank you. And my constituents are quite concerned around plastic bottles that are used in water, water as a beverage. Nestle Waters has a plant just south of Guelph. How would those plastic bottles transferring between Canada, the United States, or within Canada, how would we handle those under this regime? Would we be able to trap them in terms of recycling? I know that our percentage hasn't been high on being able to capture the PET bottles. Could you comment on that?
I'm going to turn that question to Nathalie Perron and to Danny Drouin.
Okay, so under the new arrangement with the United States that we absolutely needed to, in order to fulfill our requirements under the Basel Convention, the plastics would move between the two borders freely, based on that understanding and arrangement that we both signed, attestating that we are affirming that we both manage the waste in an environmentally sound manner. So I don't know, Danny, if you'd wanna add something to this.
Yes, merci Nathalie. Thank you for the invitation. My understanding is PET being a very high value material and with a very high recycle rate would be one that under the Basel amendments would not be subject to the controls because they are usually very single. It's a single ballot, very well sorted together and has value, and which is essentially what also the China ban has been looking at, making sure that very clean plastics can be exported.
Thank you. And in the one line that we have really that we're dealing with in this Bill C-204, the final destination or final waste, the definition around final waste being landfill or final waste being recycled, is there a definition, a common definition that's being used internationally that we could refer to in this bill?
Very briefly, please.
I will turn to Nathalie Perron.
So there's a list. The list of operations are listed in the domestic regulations. They're not listed under SEPA.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a regulatory issue rather than, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much
Thank
for
you
your
very
answers.
much. Thank you, merci. Alors, on passe maintenant à Madame Posé.
We'll go to Madame Posé. Thank you all. Thank you for your appearance. Mr. Ryan, I'd like to get back to what you were saying initially in your opening remarks as to the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment and an action plan. The plan you're referring to will deal with investment into infrastructure, and for 220, the evaluation of our needs to facilitate partnerships and capital access will be completed. Has it been completed? Is it complete at this time? Thank you for the chair. Thank you for the question, Chair, and I'll ask Denis Drouin to reply to this question. Would you, Madame Posé, repeat the question? I didn't quite catch the inquiry question. Well, as long as it's not coming out of my time, Mr. Chair. No, that's fine. In the plan put forward by the Canadian Council of the Ministers of Environment, you said that there are measures to be taken for investment and infrastructure and the evaluation of needs and needs analysis, which would facilitate partnerships, would be complete. Are they complete? Were they completed? Well, it's still in process of being finalized. It's a study which Canada put out to commissioned, in fact, and that will be looked at by provinces and territories as well to see what capital needs are required to finance the infrastructure, given the enlarged responsibilities that they have now. Yes, now producers have a greater responsibility now. And do you have plans that are coming to bear fruit right now? Well, there's a few pilot projects underway, and we also have some actually standing projects which are quite rigorous. Quebec, for example, has put legislation for the development, and British Columbia is often mentioned as an example. Could you follow up with some written information? I have so many questions, I won't have time to ask them all. But where we stand in which projects, give a few examples, and see how we're progressing. On another volley, commitments were made during the electoral campaign, in the speech from the throne, and in the mandate of various ministries to upgrade or modernize the current law. Now, we don't have the capacity to recycle everything here in Canada. And I think that reduction would be an absolutely important measure. Have measures been taken in ECCC on the reform of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or suite of acts, insofar as plastic materials are concerned? And where are you at in the progress? Our minister, in her last appearance before the committee, has indicated that they're currently working on a bill. Work is underway for SEPA, for example. And of course, it's been started. It's underway. Well, perhaps with a wider perspective, in 2020, we saw that the targets for 2030 reduction of plastic waste, zero plastic waste. You've sponsored a number of studies, and we would need 160 new facilities and $8 billion of investment in order to meet those targets. We're recycling barely 10% of plastic waste in Canada. Don't you think that policy is rather aspirational if we take a look at the numbers that we've provided? Mr. Chair, thanks for that question. I should stress that we have a multifaceted approach for the reduction of plastic wastes in order to ensure that we will in fact meet those targets. And I believe that we have to work most particularly on a number of fronts simultaneously to get there. First, we will start on how we even manufacture the product initially, the packaging, the standards involved, in order to ensure that we do have the capacity, the infrastructure, and to reduce the amount of waste that's actually created. It's a very comprehensive approach, multifaceted and multi-party. Reuse, recycle, repurpose in particular. I have to stop you there. Maybe I have time for one final question. You're talking about the manufacturing and the production of these. Well, we have biosourced materials now from wood fiber, cellulose, that would replace plastic. Now, we subsidize plastic production 5 times more than these other alternate source materials, the biosourced. On one hand, we want to reduce, and at the same time, we're subsidizing the production of classic plastic. Well, part of our agenda deals with innovation and research, and we want to stress that innovation. I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you off there because well, in order to get the complete information, perhaps I could ask for a written follow-up on production, recycling, and repurposing. Okay, we'll try to get that information from our witnesses. Ms. Collins.
So it sounds like you mentioned that the new rules, the current rules now cover final disposal, and those were accepted December 29th. Now, those are the plastic waste amendments when those amendments came into force. And so I just wanted to get really clear about the other amendment, which Canada hasn't signed, the Basel Ban Amendment, covering hazardous waste and waste for special consideration. Could Bill C-204 address the problems in that ban amendment, which we haven't signed on to, kind of address some of those aims?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. And so what I would point out is that Canada has not ratified the ban amendment because it prohibits the export of hazardous waste for recycling. And it is important to point out that Canada's domestic regulations have provisions in place that have similar outcomes to a ban. If an importing country has an import prohibition in place for a certain waste, then the export to that country cannot take place. Therefore, if a party that has ratified the ban, our regulation prohibit the export of hazardous waste to these parties. So that's already in place. The environmentally sound recycling of hazardous waste is important for the environment and supports a circular economy. So as an example, car batteries are exported for metal recovery purposes, and this can lead to environmental and economic benefits.
And so, that that provision that you're talking about, the kind of safeguard for countries that haven't signed on to the Basel Convention. We've heard a lot about the agreement that was signed with the United States. It sounds like, from what you're saying, there's mechanisms in place to prevent them exporting to countries that don't have the infrastructure to deal with it. But we just had a legal analysis. It was published by the Center for International Environmental Law. It highlighted major inconsistencies between Canada's legal obligations under the Basel Convention and the agreement that the US and Canada signed, and also referenced a few times in this committee was the New York Times article talking about how new trade data for January shows that American exports of plastic scrap to poor countries have actually stayed the same, and scrap plastics exports overall have risen. And environmental watchdogs are saying that this is evidence that they're ignoring the rules, that American companies are actually interpreting the law and these new rules in ways that actually still allow them to ship overseas. So I'm just curious about how Environment Canada is dealing with some of that information.
Mr. Chair, I'm not clear on what the question is. I apologize.
So it sounds to me like the United States-Canada deal isn't actually addressing the concern that exports are going to poorer countries without the infrastructure to deal with it, that there is this kind of loophole. That's what our kind of environmental stakeholders, this new report from the Center for International Environmental Law is saying the same things. I'm just curious about a response on some of those concerns.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I mentioned, under our arrangement, we've confirmed that the United States has an environmentally sound management of non-hazardous waste and scraps that are subject to transboundary movement. And as I mentioned, a company who is wanting to transit through the United States and export to another country is required to obtain an export permit. However, having said that, no environmental regime is bulletproof, and should someone choose to contravene the regulations and take actions that are not permitted, our regulations and legislations don't prevent that. That's when our enforcement regime comes into play, and that we need to follow up and make sure we're taking corrective actions. And the same holds true for the United States or any other country for that matter. And on that note, I might just say that that Canada has taken action recently with respect to the illegal export of waste and put in place an operations with a number of other countries to look to see that we are effectively managing these wastes. And this exercise was undertaken with Canadian Border Services as well. Sorry.
Great. That's a good segue into my next question, which was the report published in 2016 showing these huge gaps in controlling exports at the border. The report found the CBSA doesn't have the capacity to inspect up to a third of shipments that are designated as high risk. There's been lots of high-profile cases that we've talked about, the Philippines, et cetera. Can you describe how ECCC works with Canadian Border Service Agency and Global Affairs Canada to prevent some of these shipments of waste overseas?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And I might just note
briefly,
that.
Please, yeah.
So we do take action to deal with alleged violations under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and including first doing awareness sessions and making sure that our regulatees understand what their legal obligations are. We also take follow-up actions, including having authorities like ministerial orders, detention orders for shipments, injunctions, etc. We have undertaken, as I mentioned recently, a specific operation in context with a number of other countries targeting movements at the border. We did so in conjunction with Canada Border Services, and we use behavioral intelligence to help target the shipments.
Great. Okay, we have time for a second round. Mr. Albas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for the work they do for Canadians. It's quite good to have you here. Ms. Ryan, in your remarks, you spoke of, and I quote, export permit is required for the export of plastic waste subject to the convention from Canada to a basal party. This is a concrete and effective mechanism to ensure that exports of plastic waste covered by the convention take place only if the consent of the importing country has been obtained, end quote. Except a huge issue is that the United States is obviously not a basal party, and thus the U.S. could be used as an export loophole to avoid the rules. Now, many members have raised questions. We talked about the New York Times piece. Are you not worried?
So Canada, as I mentioned, Canada recently entered into an arrangement with the United States with respect to the management of waste that are destined to the United States for final disposal. With respect to waste that's transiting on, that is material requires an export permit, and it requires an export permit in Canada. And so I think we will need to continue to make sure that we're diligent in terms of making sure our industry complies with their obligations, and that we continue to work internationally with partners with respect to these issues.
Well, with respect to these issues, in in the minister's response to Q299 to Scott Davidson, it actually said that your ECCC is not issuing permits regarding exports of plastic waste since 2016. You've issued no permits, and that now that the Basel Convention has taken a hold, that you will track some information, some permits. Will you be tracking permits to the United States under this agreement?
So I'll turn to Nathalie Perron to speak to the specifics of what's required under our regulation and what's required under the arrangement, because there's different requirements with respect to the different types of waste. So Nathalie Perron.
I would only like to hear about whether or not there will be permits to the United States in regards to this agreement we have.
There will be permits to the United States for waste that is not covered under the Basel Convention, that is not subject to the scope of the Basel Convention.
Will plastic waste for final disposal be permitted, yes or no?
For a hazardous waste, we'll need a permit, and all the waste that will transit through the United States will also need a permit, whether it's non-hazardous or not.
So MP Collins had mentioned earlier that the Center for International Environmental Law said that the arrangement the Canadian government has, which contains 11 operative paragraphs, does not meet Article 11 of the Basel Convention requirements, and therefore must be considered invalid. It says in there further the report that they do not believe the United States is equivalent to a Basel abiding country. Do you believe it is an equivalent?
So I will turn to my colleague, Richard Tarasovsky, to answer with respect to trade issues.
Thank you very much. I have also read the report from the Center for International Environmental Law. They make a number of allegations in that report. I would say that Canada has based the arrangement on an assessment that the United States carries out environmentally sound management of its wastes. That is what the arrangement is based upon. So the arrangement itself affirms that it carries out this environmentally sound management of non-hazardous waste and scrap, and it also contains a commitment to further manage those wastes and scrap in
So in regards to that, though, the New York Times piece on March 12th of this year, it literally says, and I quote, if the United States were to ratify the Basel Agreement, which would require Congress to pass legislation, traders found to be shipping plastic waste overseas could be prosecuted. But short of that, the United States government is limited in its ability to stop plastic waste exports. So even if there was traceability, there are no provisions under U.S. law that would allow them to enforce that mechanism. How can you say it's equivalent?
Well, I can't comment on the effectiveness of U.S. law.
Okay, well, let's go back. Let's go back.
But I would say that in all likelihood, the waste leaving the United States would be destined for a party to the Basel Convention.
Okay.
The only way that can take place is if there is an agreement between the United States and that importing country, and so. And therefore,
well, if the United States can't charge under their own laws, I don't see how it could be under ours.
It would only be subject to.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move on.
We have to go to Mr. Saini now. Our 5 minutes are up, Mr. Albus. Mr. Saini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ryan, I want you just to clarify certain things for me, because we've been talking about a lot of different things. So let's make it as succinct as possible. You mentioned in your opening remarks that Canada had accepted the plastic waste amendments under the Basel Convention on December 29th, 2020, to strengthen controls on the transboundary movement of plastic waste. Can you explain to me in succinct language, what will these amendments actually do?
I'm going to turn to Nathalie Perron to provide you that answer.
So those amendments now have the effect that they, for all plastic waste, except the very, very clean one, no? All plastic waste going to a Basel party is now subject to the regulations and requires a permit prior to export. In order to have a permit, we need to obtain consent from the importing country. And it's through the notification process and the permitting process that we seek consent from the importing country, and only when we receive consents that we emit a permit.
Okay. So now with this specific bill, right, is it necessary then?
So, sorry. So, as I said before, the bill focused on a ban for plastics destined for final disposal only. Our domestic reg with the new Basel amendments applies to both final disposal and recycling.
So accepting the Basel amendments effectively is what this bill is trying to say.
Mr. Chair, so I don't think it's for us to speak to what the intent is of the bill. I think it's for the proponent to speak to.
Okay.
But in terms of the authorities, we have the authority to do the nature of the work that's been described.
Okay. So the second question I want, because it's been also raised, is the arrangement between Canada and United States, and how this arrangement. Because I think I would like clarity on that also, because one of the sort of concepts is for having something disposed of in an environmentally safe manner. Does that arrangement between the United States and Canada guarantee that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I would say is the arrangement with the United States confirms that through our assessment of their regulatory regime that that it's our view that they have an environmentally sound management of their material. And
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, as I mentioned previously, there's no regime that will guarantee. There's no way to guarantee any regime because it's people's behavior and whether they choose to comply with the regime. And so that's why we have robust enforcement and compliance promotion to help ensure that regulatees are adhering to the rules.
As you're aware, solid waste management also involves the provinces and the territories. So if we were to, ban the export of plastic waste for final disposal, we would have issues with solid waste that comes from municipalities, also governed by the provinces. But what would be the immediate, that immediate prohibition? How would that impact domestic landfilling capacity? Because if you can't send it, you'd have to do something. So how would that conflict with municipal agreements, provincial agreements, but also the landfilling capacity if we were to immediately prohibit the export of plastic?
So I'll turn to Nathalie Perron to answer that question.
So we know that the landfilling capacity in Canada is put to a stretch in some areas if the waste that is currently exported to the U.S. for and that contain the plastics, some plastics that are listed in the proposed Schedule 7, that would mean that they can no longer travel to the U.S. and it would put a stretch probably on some provinces' capacity to manage it.
And how long does it take to create a landfill site? How long does it take?
So thanks, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Yes, not in a position to give you the specifics, as the approval and licensing of landfill sites is not something that's done by the federal government for domestic material. But we know that these things can take many years.
Okay.
Madame Posé,
thank you.
Vous avez 2 minutes et demie.
C'est à mon tour?
Yes, you have 2 minutes and a half. Yes, go ahead. No, it's okay. I'm just waiting for the interpretation, so there's a little lag. I spoke a little earlier with you at the reduction of plastic waste. I talked about biosourced inputs. We wouldn't be here today if we wouldn't be talking about waste, but we talk about resources. Integrated management was discussed in a number of publications, and as a large part of the responsibility is provincial. Can you tell us if there are partnership programs in place to emphasize and to facilitate getting at the state of being in a circular economy? Yes, thank you for that question. In fact, it's part of our strategy on zero plastic waste plan, as fostered and presented by the Canadian Council of Ministers for the Environment. I'd ask Denis Drouin to give you more details on that. Yes, we do have partnerships with a number of provinces and pilot projects for Ontario in compostability of various products. Another one like similar program with Quebec, all aiming at circular economy. We're working with eco-industries in Quebec, for example, trying to find the best ways of optimizing and getting best value for money on some wastes which are not necessarily PET, to find a recycling or a gathering spot to collect these materials. Well, there's been some Industry Canada research projects. But when we talk about grants, I think it was $500 million for the National Research Centre, and Petro-Canada has received millions of dollars in subsidies. Does ECCC hope to increase the subsidies that go towards bioplastics rather than petrochemicals? Well, part and parcel of our zero plastic targets, I'll say it in English, elevation challenges. We do offer subsidies, and we can give you a list of the various funds and how they were distributed. That's fine. Ms. Collins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to go back to the question around hazardous waste and waste for special consideration, and especially the question around waste for special consideration. It seemed like, Ms. Ryan, you were kind of alluding to the fact that we have regulations that cover this already. Now, what has changed since we haven't signed on to that Basel ban amendment, just to the plastic waste amendments? What's changed for the pieces around waste for special consideration since some of those high-profile cases, the Philippines, et cetera?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So there was an important amendment made to our regulations, and I'll let Nathalie Perron speak to the specifics of that.
So I hope I understand the question correctly, but in 2016, the regulations were amended to include within the definition of hazardous waste a clause that describes where if an importing country controls or prohibits a waste, then it becomes automatically under our regulation hazardous, and then it's controlled. So for the ban, in effect, it has the same effect or same outcome than the ban amendment, because any countries that signed up on the ban amendment.
Just because I only have 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
In 2019, there was a report showing that 150,000 shipping containers of U.S. plastic waste was exported to countries with poor waste management, and that was a report from 2019, happened in 2018. Given the kind of loopholes that exist, I'm just curious about that kind of around us shipping to the U.S. this waste for special consideration, it then ending up in landfills, even if our regulations might have been changed since then.
So thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. So it's important to remember, if a waste is transiting through the United States but destined for final disposal elsewhere, it is subject to our regulations and is subject to a permit, and we need the prior informed consent of the country to which it's destined. And so that if they're doing something to the contrary, then that would be a violation of our regulations.
Thank you. Mr. Redekop for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Ryan, in your answer to Madame Pose, you indicated that the government was following a multifaceted approach to reduce plastic waste. So your department opposes C204, and your alternative is to reduce plastic waste. And some of the ideas the government's imposing are to declare plastics as a toxic substance under SEPA, and to ban plastics for certain end uses. For example, a lot of so-called plastic waste comes from food packaging. Now, you'll recall in 2008, 22 people died from a listeriosis outbreak in Canada. There were also E. coli outbreaks, and recommendations coming from reports of those outbreaks included strengthening food safety measures, including inert packaging, i.e. plastics. Now, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency recently put into effect the Safe Food for Canadian regulations. Now, has the CFIA, Agriculture Canada, and Health Canada been consulted on the plastics ban?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So as part of our comprehensive approach to zero plastic waste, we issued a discussion paper for public comments, and one of the elements of that is the approach to banning problematic single-use plastics. And we worked jointly with our colleagues at Health Canada in the drafting of that, and have also consulted with other federal departments with respect to that. In addition, in conducting our science assessment on plastic waste, we worked jointly with Health Canada, but also consulted broadly with other government agencies, Research Institute, and others with respect to the issues in terms of the concerns from a science perspective on
So,
this
Ms. Ryan,
issue.
can you confirm that you did talk to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Agriculture Canada?
Yes, we can confirm.
Okay. Now, it took 6 years for this legislation to come into effect after Jerry Ritz, the great Saskatchewan man, by the way, and the Harper government implemented these regulations. What time frame will Canadian agriculture processors, food processors, grocery stores, consumers, et cetera, how long will they have to adapt to a plastics ban?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So currently we issued a discussion paper, and as well, we put forward a proposal for public comment on adding plastic manufacture to Schedule 1 of SEPA. These are the first steps in our regulatory process. We're currently assessing the comments with respect to the discussion paper, and decisions will be forthcoming in terms of the next steps with respect to that.
Mr. Chair, I'll pass the rest of my time to Mr. Albus.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Redekop. So on Monday, there was disagreement over the definition of final disposal. Now, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act refers to the Basel Convention on this topic, and the convention says that the following operations are not final disposal: operations which may lead to resource recovery, recycling, reclamation, direct reuse, or alternative uses. Is this your understanding of the Basel Convention and rules?
I will turn to my colleague, Nathalie Perron, to speak to the Basel Convention.
Thank you. So the Basel Convention lists all the different operations that are considered recycling, and those that are recycling disposal, and they are those operations are in our regulations. So we have a copy of those.
So there's Annex 4A and Annex 4B of the Basel Convention. So based on that, this bill, which would amend the SEPA, and SEPA uses the definition from the Basel Convention, then nothing in this bill would limit any recycling, resource recovery, or reuse activities. Is that correct, Madam Perron?
I can't comment on what the bill intends to do. I'm sorry.
Well, but right now, SEPA has a definition for final disposal that is based and incorporation by reference on the Basel Convention. Yes or no?
Go ahead.
Sorry. With respect to the term final disposal, the way in which we deal with it under our requirements is through our regulations. And what Madame Perron indicated is that our regulations make reference to the same list of materials that's identified in the Basel Convention. It's not
so there is a workable definition within SEPA for final disposal that's utilized currently in the regulations.
The SEPA does not contain a definition for final disposal. The types of measures that get controlled are subsequently defined specifically by regulation.
But it is an incorporation by reference. So there is a working definition in the Basel Convention, what is and what can be used for an Annex B that allows for the clear reuse of products like that I've mentioned here. Recycling, reclamation, resource recovery, direct reuse, or alternative uses.
It's not an incorporation by reference. Our regulation lists those operations in the regulation. They're not listed under SEPA. I hope this helps.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to thank our witnesses. So I'm just reading a message from the clerk. Okay, so I'll thank our witnesses for their knowledge and insights. I thought they were good rounds of questions. We'll now, so.
Mr. Chair, there isn't, I can't get my questions in. There's 2 minutes left.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Mr. Bay. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry, I've got too many emails coming in, too many messages, but yes, you're right. You have 5 minutes. I'm sorry, Mr. Shifke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that very much.
My apologies.
No worries. And I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. So there's been a lot of talk at this committee about the importance of enforcement, and rightfully so. In your review to all the witnesses of C204, how would the prohibition be enforced under SEPA? Now, I understand the issue could be clarified via regulatory amendments under paragraph 191A, but those take a significant amount of time. That said, until regulatory amendments are made, enforcement authorities could be limited in that there may not be authority to inspect a shipment of listed plastic waste, quote unquote, if Bill C-204 was enacted as drafted. Is that an accurate characterization? Would additional amendments be needed to ensure enforceability of the proposed prohibition?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And so, as we mentioned, the bill targets the final disposal. When we're talking about a shipment and an export, that would be a different activity.
Okay, and could this potentially divert resources from other enforcement priorities?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. In terms of any of the activities that we undertake, we have a limited amount of resources that we have available to us, and we targeted our resources based on priorities. I can't speak to the specifics in terms of what action would be taken on a specific case. Those would be specific to the enforcement office, but we have a limited amount of resources to do the work that we have before us.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ryan. So the design of any measure that may affect trade has to take into account Canada's international trade law and our obligations into account, and such obligations arising from agreements like the World Trade Organization, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the WTO General Agreement on Trade Services, and Canada's free trade agreements. How would the prohibition be consistent with Canada's international trade obligations?
Thank you for that question, and I'll turn to Richard Tarasovsky to answer that question.
Well, I would only say that all the instruments that you've identified are indeed relevant. They do have a list of provisions in themselves which would be important considerations. For example, all of the instruments you mentioned have a prohibition on export restrictions. There is also a set of exceptions that relate to environmental issues. These exceptions must be applied in a manner that involves looking at a whole series of factors, that they're very fact specific, and they must not lead to any arbitrary discrimination.
Thank you, Mr. Taraskovsky. From a domestic point of view, what would the impacts on waste management in Canada be if we were to ban the export of plastic waste for final disposal? How would this immediate prohibition impact domestic landfill capacity in provinces and territories and municipal solid waste management? And how would it impact federal relations with provinces and territories as well as municipalities?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. As we previously heard, the capacity of our landfill sites, in addition to our waste management and recycling facilities, it's stretched, and so adding to that, adding material for them to handle will be very challenging and potentially could be very problematic for them with respect to our relations with our provinces and territories, as well as municipalities. Provinces are responsible for the permitting and management of waste, and then have authorize others to undertake activities. And so this will place additional responsibilities and burden on them in terms of the actions that they will need to undertake.
Thank you very much. That's the end of my questioning, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shifkin. Again, I apologize for the confusion trying to take your time away. You know I don't mean to do that. Thank you again, a second time, to the witnesses for being here.
Monsieur le Président, est-ce que je peux faire un petit rappel au règlement, s'il vous plaît?
Oui.
May a point of order, if I may? I made a slight error earlier, and I don't want it to stay on the record. I spoke of the hundreds of millions of public money that was subsidized or granted to the petrochemical industry, that they had 150 million for 150 million. It was 150,000, not million, so there's quite a difference there. Hundreds of millions for the petro sector and thousands of dollars for the others. That'll be corrected in the transcript. Thank you. So thank you to our witnesses. You are free to leave the meeting. We appreciated very much the time that you've already given us today, and we will continue.
I'd like to propose a motion, if I may, before we begin the next portion of our meeting.
Okay. Okay.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
We are not in committee business, so I don't think it's appropriate for a motion to be made at this time.
Okay, one moment, please. Thank you again to the witness.
Point of order, please.
Yes. Sorry, we can't hear you, Ms. McLeod.
Typically, when we do clause by clause, we do have the witnesses with us so that we may ask questions of an amendment and the impact of an amendment. So I'm just surprised that the officials have been dismissed, because the practice is sometimes members of parliament will have a question about an amendment, and now we will not have the opportunity to ask them what the impact will be. Thank you.
Yeah, I would. I don't know how you want to proceed on that. I was told that they felt that they couldn't offer legal advice. So but you have a point there, Ms. McLeod. I mean, they could always comment on the impact of an amendment.
We've always had officials for clause by clause to
excuse
make
me a moment,
comment.
please. Excuse me. I'm just going to put this on pause for a second. I'll be right back.
schedule before the
sorry,
committee today.
just a second. Mr. Albus, yes, what was your point
Yeah,
of order?
I did actually ask Mr. Chair that we're not in committee business,
Oh, right,
so we're not in a position to take
well, let me deal with your point of order too. I'll deal with your point of order. Just a second.
Then just to clarify, Mr. Chair, my motion is to the schedule before the committee today, so it is in order.
Oh, so it's in order because it's related to the work today. So, but please give me a Mr. Shifke, it's related to the bill.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, is it an amendment to the bill?
No, it's a motion. Would you like me to read it, Mr. Chair?
Well, yeah, you can read it, sure.
Que le comité tient une audience supplémentaire.
That we have a supplementary session on Bill C-204 before proceeding to the clause-by-clause study, and that the sponsor and representatives, appropriate representatives from the Canadian government be represented to reply to supplementary questions.
Hearing in relation to the consideration of C-204 before proceeding with the clause-by-clause consideration, and that the sponsor of the bill and appropriate Government of Canada officials be invited to attend to answer additional questions. And I guess just a quick synopsis of the reason why I feel this is important, Mr. Speaker, is simply that there have been a number of issues and challenges that have been brought up by the witnesses that we've had speak before this committee so far. And I feel that just if we're doing our due diligence as a committee, it merits more discussion. I feel that we need to be in a situation where we can hear more about some of the ways that many of these challenges can be rectified, which I don't think has been done so far before this is sent back to report stage. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yeah, well, that's in order. Yeah, Mr. Albus again?
Yeah, I would just say again that this is not in regards to the bill itself, but to the study, and should just be ruled out of order. We all came prepared for clause by clause. Everyone knew this. This should have been done in committee business prior to today's meeting, Mr. Chair. I would ask you to rule it out of order. It is not on our agenda to be changing this.
I consider this in order. It's totally related to what we're doing. You're free to challenge that.
Yeah, I'll put up my hand then.
Okay, so you're challenging this ruling.
No, I'm not challenging. I'm gonna speak to the debate, Mr. Chair. I do respect when you make a decision.
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, well then the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I find that this is very troubling that we had officials that were just here that could have stayed for clause by clause suddenly log off, and then and giving the rationale that they weren't needed for today. Mr. Chair, we all had the ability to submit witnesses. We did plan to do this in an orderly way with 2 meetings. All parties agreed to that, and we all got the chance to put forward witnesses. This will delay the work of the committee. As you know, Mr. Chair, better than anyone, we have several different motions that have been referred to this committee, many of them liberal, and they will be pushing other things back as the House of Commons has given this to us for us to do. Mr. Chair, I would just simply ask all members that are concerned about not being able to get to the important work that the House has sent to us, and out of respect for the House that sent us this, I believe that we should vote this out. We've had industry, we've had environmental groups, we have had the government itself come and talk about its policies, and we all agreed to a 2-step process. So I would just ask all members to vote against this motion. I'm very disappointed that this was done and with no consultation. Obviously, the member, read it out, so he's had this for quite some time. To not be consulting with other party members or other parties, I think really just shows that the member didn't do his homework at the correct time and worked with other parties to have an orderly schedule where everyone's concerns could be made out.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Baker. Mr. Albus, thanks for taking your hand down. For some reason, I can't seem to do it at my end. I have Mr. Shifke. No, wait.
It was Mr. Baker first.
Yeah, but somehow things have reversed. Anyway, Mr. Baker.
Sorry, Chair. I took my hand down very quickly per your request. I was too quick. Yeah. Okay. So, Chair, I just speaking to to the motion presented by Mr. Schiffke. You know, when I think about, I think what Mr. Schiffke's trying to do, I'm not speaking for him, but I see a lot of merit in what he's recommending. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got a situation where we have a bill, concerns have been raised. I'll cite one that concerns me. It's something that Mr. Saini was trying to ask questions about, but I don't think there was enough time to explore it, which is why I think, one of the reasons why I think Mr. Schiffke's, or an example of why Mr. Schiffke's motion has merit. Mr. Saini was asking something that I was also asking about at our prior committee meeting of the witnesses there, which is what the impact of this bill would have on Canada's waste disposal system and our landfills. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as a committee that's studying this bill and digging into the details of this bill and the implications of this bill, that we understand what that is. Like, can this bill actually be implemented? Is it realistic? Is it feasible? The concerns that have been raised that I'm alluding to are around what would happen if the bill were to be passed, and what would happen to waste that's currently being exported that could no longer be exported, whether that's to the United States or anywhere else, because that's what this bill would do. It would ban the export completely. And we heard a figure of the number of tons of waste that are exported every year. That's just to the United States from officials here today, never mind all the other countries that we export waste to. And so you can imagine that if you suddenly shut the border to that complete export, that waste has to go to landfills. In response to a question that I asked yesterday, that was the answer we were given by one of the witnesses. Our last meeting, that was one of the answers given by one of the witnesses. We know from officials today that landfills are at capacity. They said that to us today. In fact, the quote, and I wrote it down, is capacity of landfills, from Ms. Ryan, capacity of landfills is stretched. Adding material to handle will be very challenging and potentially very problematic. So I think as a member of the committee whose responsibility it is to evaluate the pros and cons of legislation that comes to us, this is one of the potential cons that officials are flagging for us. It's a legitimate concern, and without even hearing from officials, I already had that concern. So if I think about these millions of tons of waste that suddenly are not going to be exported, they have to be put somewhere. They have to be put in landfills that are already at capacity. That means the landfills will not be able to handle them. And my bet, and from my experience in consulting with people who I know who know a lot about this, it takes around 5 years to get a new landfill set up, because those need to be permitted and regulated and put in place. So if I think about just that issue alone, which I'm concerned about the idea that we would go ahead without getting that additional input that Mr. Schiffke's motion would allow us to get from officials and from others, to make sure that we know whether or not this bill could actually be implemented. So that would be my arguments for Mr. Schiffke's motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Schiffke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I would simply point out that as parliamentarians and as members of this committee, we have a responsibility to thoroughly vet the legislation that comes before us. In 1.5 meetings that we've had so far, that we've only had on this, 1.5 meetings, we have heard significant feedback that there are huge challenges with this piece of legislation as it stands. And I took notes as we went and listened to every single one of them. I want to share some of those with you. The bill's sponsor himself, Mr. Davidson, acknowledged that he was rushed in drafting this bill as he drew number 5 in the PMB lottery. And his quote was, "I understand, I was probably as shocked as you that I drew number 5 in the PMB and had to get this bill drafted quickly with the House of Commons. That was actually a bit of a chore to do and meet with witnesses all at the beginning of COVID." We heard from other witnesses, from as well as the Basel Action Network, the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, the David Suzuki Foundation, the Recycling Council of Ontario, and we just finished hearing from government officials, all of whom raised significant concerns with the bill as it's currently drafted. James Puckett of the Basel Action Network raised concerns that this bill will not be effective at addressing the root problem. And he's quoted as saying, "In fact, the biggest global problem which Mr. Davidson and others hope to address with this bill will not be addressed because the bill currently only looks at exports for final disposal, that is landfilling or incineration. The bill currently doesn't address the heart of the problem, which is exports for recycling. Bob Masterson, the president and CEO of the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, raised important considerations about the redundancy and technical issues with the bill. And he is quoted as saying, on many levels, Bill C-204 is redundant to those requirements at the same time as it adds confusion. The list of plastic wastes, we include things like ethylene, which is a feedstock. It's not plastic waste. There is no definition. MP Davidson gave a nice definition of final disposal. That is not in the bill itself. There's a lack of process that will allow for the continued movement of post-consumer materials, specifically between Canada, the United States, and other OECD countries, and said this would frustrate the circular economy. Joanne Saint-Gadard with Recycling Council of Ontario raised important considerations around transparency and said, I think the spirit here is to get more transparency on what it is we are collecting and sending to other shores. And certainly that is similar to what we should be doing domestically as well. Under the guise of recycling, not all recyclable material is in fact recycled. We need traceability from points of generation through to final disposition. Outright banning that is not really going to get at the heart of the issue, which is no matter what we are generating or how we are generating it or where it is actually managed, we need to have a line of sight on what that is to ensure the materials are managed to the highest end uses and also under very strict human and health protections. It is my strong view, colleagues, that this committee needs to hear from additional witnesses before we can reasonably be in a position to move to clause by clause consideration of the bill and send it back for report stage. I'd just like to add, we just heard from department officials about their serious concerns relating to international trade, relating to our international agreements, and how this bill, as it currently stands, actually puts us at odds with many of those international agreements that we've signed on to. So with that, colleagues, I strongly encourage all my colleagues from the NDP, the Bloc, and the Conservatives to consider giving more time to this bill. It could be as soon as 2 weeks from now at our next constituency week, our off-sitting week. For those of you who think that this is being booted down the road and that we don't want to see this move forward, it could be as soon as that, perhaps sooner if the chair can tell us there's an opening. But committee members need to do their due diligence on this to try to better address the issues that have been raised by witness after witness from both the private sector, from the government side, as well as not-for-profit to environmental organizations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shifke. Madame Posey. Madame Posey?
Oui, d'accord.
Yes, thank you. Well, if we prolong, what other witnesses do we want to hear from? We've heard from the chemical people, the Department of Environmental groups. Are there further witnesses that we want to call or to hear from? I thought it was fairly complete. That's my first question. Secondly, if we do extend our study, are we allowed to propose new amendments? Interesting question. Madam Clerk? Yes, on the amendments, yes. Well, there's no actual time limit to present amendments. So they can even come from the floor. So thank you, Madam Posey, for your questions. Madam Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to follow up on my comments of both Mr. Shifke and my colleague, Mr. Baker. Throughout the conversation today with the officials that we had here, there seemed to be a tremendous amount of uncertainty when it comes to terminology in terms of waste and plastic waste, in terms of, there doesn't seem to be anything in the bill we're talking a lot about what we would export out, but we're not even discussing what potentially could be imported in. And in addition to that, I do have significant concerns with an absolute ban on export is that we're almost lock jamming the internal waste management here in Canada and creating an even bigger disposal problem here when we're actually trying to resolve it. And these things, there's a chain of events that would be sparked off by this, that the officials are saying that we do have mechanisms and solid agreements in place in the current structures that we have that may make 204 redundant. We're not sure about that yet. And there's really, I'd like to share my concerns that with that uncertainty, that we do need more time with this. And the proposal of time is really quite limited. We're not dragging this out. My colleague, Mr. Shifke, and the chair didn't disagree with that there's a possibility of putting this in a short amount, in a shorter term of time. We've all clearly committed time over our constituent weeks to be here to do this important work. And I just don't feel that we're there yet.
Thank you, Ms. Sachs. Mr. Saini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, the study was, I think, raised a lot of issues for me personally. A couple of them, if I start even internationally, I've never received a clear answer. We keep talking about the Basel Convention and the Canada-US agreement that was signed back in October. But what we haven't discussed is the further broader implications, whether it be with the WHO or whether it be with GATT or whether it be the WTO and with GATT. So what would the impact be on our international agreements, and how would that impact our ability to do other things? And so for me, that's a question I think that's very important, because we live in a global world, and any legislation that we put through here has to be seen through a lens is how does this affect our trading partners and our global responsibilities when it comes to WTO and the GATT agreements that we've signed. The second thing that was raised was the question, and Mr. Baker had alluded to this, about landfills. Now, I don't know much about landfills, but I'm sure there is a permitting procedure. I'm sure land has to be purchased. I'm sure that that other requirements will have to be made to affect if there is a prohibition. Then obviously there is going to have an increased domestic capacity for more landfill capacity, and not knowing what the procedure was, but knowing that it takes around sometimes up to 5 years for landfills to be created. However, there is a provincial and a municipal jurisdiction that's also involved, and nobody has clearly stated to me over the last 2 meetings or meeting and a half is how do we work with our provincial and territorial partners, and how are we going to try and make sure that they're part of the conversation as opposed to just imposing something upon them. The third thing I think we also need to do is take a much broader study, because we've heard conflicting advice from different stakeholders who've said one thing, that this would work, and something else would work. Now, when we look at the Basel Convention, we see the amendments capture everything. So this redundancy is going to create more regulation, more red tape, more frustration for the suppliers and the creators of plastic, or is it actually going to solve and remedy a problem? So I think there's a lot of things that have emerged over the last meeting and a half that have raised questions. I think that we all want to do a good job and make sure that we analyze and study this legislation in a way that it should be given the respect that it has, and we should try to make sure that we maybe and to Mr. Shifke's point, I think that if I can maybe add a sub amendment, I think what I would like to add is maybe we need to call the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Maybe we have to call provincial officials to see how this would work, and what's the capacity of the provinces, what's the capacity of provincial officials. Also, maybe to look at what is our obligation in terms of when we trade solid waste between the United States back and forth, what would be the implication of that? What may also be our international treaty obligations? Because the gentleman from GAC said that this would be important, but he didn't allude to that. So I think that maybe if I'm permitted, Mr. Chair, to make amend Mr. Shifke's motion, I would like to, or sub-amendment, I would like to include FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the provinces, and maybe if anybody else who we think would be, but I think FCM and the provinces at the minimum should have the opportunity to come and speak to this, because they're going to be impacted, whether materially or financially. And I think it's important that we have their voice. And I also appreciate the fact of learning how the permitting process actually goes from start to finish. How do you actually create a landfill site? What's required? What's the cost? And so I think I would like to suggest that sub-amendment if I can.
We don't have the written version of the Mr. Shifke's motion in front of me. Mr. Shifke, you were proposing one more meeting. Is that it? Before clause by clause? Could you just clarify for me? Because I don't have it written down in front of me.
Yes, and my motion was, it's a friendly amendment that my colleague, Mr. Saini, is proposing. I was actually looking to invite appropriate Government of Canada officials as well as the proponent of the bill, but I see a good amount of a lot that can come from inviting the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and provincial government representatives should they wish to take part as well.
Well, if I may say, I don't know if this is in order for me to make this comment, but if we're talking about one meeting, and we haven't agreed to this, but if we're talking about one meeting, you know, you can't overload it with witnesses or it just becomes unworkable. That's why we often let the analysts and the chair and the clerk work together to try and find a balance. So what your motion is saying, the officials who were here today, and Mr. Davidson, you said should be invited, but I don't think, to be honest with you, I'd have to look into this, but I don't think it would be right to put Mr. Davidson on a panel with officials and have them debate. I think that would be totally wrong. One would have to go before the other, and so we, you know, theoretically we could add other people to sit with Mr. Davidson. That's fine, but we can't add in to be, if it's only one meeting, practically speaking, we can't just add a whole list. So you could, I suppose, I suppose you could, Mr. Saini, you didn't, I'm not sure you formally presented a certain witness names. I thought you were sort of just throwing some names out there as potential. Do you want to specifically say Federation of Canadian Municipalities?
Yes.
And anyone, if you talk about provincial governments, I mean, this will never end. We're going to have like every provincial and territorial government in the country. So but Federation of Canadian Municipalities is what you're suggesting.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else?
You know, I mean, I think for right now we'll just go with FCM.
Okay. So that's the friendly amendment, FCM. Mr. Shifke accepts it.
Yeah.
Okay. We were at Ms. Collins.
Yeah, I guess I'm a bit concerned about, I want to kind of maybe echo Madame Posé's comments about how we're choosing these witnesses, what the benefit of extending it is, since we've heard from a number of, we've heard from the government officials, we've heard from environmental stakeholders, and we've heard from the mover of the bill already. And so bringing them back in, I can see the benefit of having government officials here while we do the clause by clause. That seems like that could be helpful as we're debating. I've heard a lot of the concerns raised are actually, you know, in the amendments that have been submitted. There's a number of amendments already. We kind of could be debating these things as we go through those amendments and moving forward with this. So yeah, I think in order to support some kind of additional day, I would want to think more thoroughly through what additional witnesses, and making sure that there's, yeah, I guess maybe I'll pause there, but I'm feeling a bit torn about this one.
Well, just in terms of the officials, I plan to invite them, formally invite them to be there for clause by clause, unless the committee objects, but I don't see any objections. So we'll go to Mr. Albus.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say, Mr. Chair, I object the fact that we haven't even passed this motion and we're already talking about another meeting. Many of us came prepared to do clause by clause today. We came prepared and asked questions of all witnesses in good faith. We all had the ability to bring people forward. If certain members of the committee, and again, there were some concerns in the House, this met the will of Parliament. Parliament has passed this to our committee. You've been able to have the same opportunity as any other members to be able to ask your questions. And many of us have come here in good faith with our clause by clause. So I just would simply say that if members are not satisfied with the level of testimony, they should perhaps be asking themselves why they didn't submit those witnesses themselves and have that ability. So that being said, I would like us to dispose of this motion so we can get to clause by clause.
Okay, well, seeing no other speakers, we'll proceed to a vote. I guess a roll call vote, Madam Chair, is that?
Certainly.
Would that be,
yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Baker?
So Clerk, could I just ask you to clarify what it is we're voting on?
Sure. We're voting on Mr. Shifke's motion that the committee hold an additional hearing in relation to the consideration of C-204 before proceeding with clause-by-clause consideration, and that the sponsor of the bill and appropriate Government of Canada officials be invited to attend to answer additional questions. And also Mr. Saini's friendly amendment concerning additional witnesses, for example, municipalities, provincial officials, and the like.
So I've got Madame Posé with her hand up, but I imagine the vote's been called, so it can't be debate. It has to be just a point of information.
Je m'excuse, Monsieur le Président.
Oui.
Just a moment, Madame Posé. I'll come right back.
Speak, but it can't be to debate the idea. It's got
Right.
to be a point of information. Alors, si vous avez un point d'information.
If you have a point of information, you're seeking clarification or information, that's fine, but no debate is allowed at this point. We'll be calling the vote on the motion. If you're looking for clarification, information, we can answer your question. Well, I don't have the written version of the motion. Will there be any limit on time? Will it be an extra hour, a session of 1 hour? That wasn't mentioned. It says one meeting. A meeting can be 1 hour or 2 hours.
I just wanted to make sure I heard the clerk mention provincial counterparts, and I thought that was taken out of the amendment to the amendment.
It is.
It was?
Mr.
Okay,
Mr.
my apologies.
Saini, stopped at FCM. That's it.
Okay, my apologies.
So, okay, no problem. Can we go to the vote now?
Certainly. Mr. Baker?
Sorry, in favor.
Ms. Bessette? In favor?
En faveur.
Merci. Mr. Saini?
In favor?
Ms. Sachs?
In favor?
Mr. Shifke?
In favor.
Mr. Albus?
Against?
Mr. Generou?
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod?
Opposed, sorry.
Mr. Redekop?
Mr. Redekop, on mute.
Opposed.
Madame Posé?
Je pense que je vais être pour, là, tout en étant déchirée.
Ms. Collins?
Against.
So is that a tie? No.
6
No.
yeas, 5 nays.
Okay. So we will have another meeting. We'll invite the FCM. There's been no time limit set on, well, this is a question again for the clerk. I mean, who decides if it's 1 hour and then we go to clause by clause, or if it's 2 hours and, you know, then we go to clause by clause and yet another meeting? Who makes that call?
It would be the committee that would decide, that would provide me with direction on how to proceed.
How would we do that?
Well, I think
It wasn't in the motion. It wasn't specified in the motion. Can that not be at the discretion of the chair? Or?
I believe there are some people who would like to speak, but technically,
Okay,
it's the
I'm sorry,
committee, or
boy.
I take direction from the committee or the chair.
Madame Posé?
Mais ma question.
Well, that was the gist of my question. I'm rather torn to vote for or against, but if it's 1 hour and then we go clause by clause, that would be fine. That would be fine. So I would say, I would suggest 1 hour. Are you making a motion of that? Yes, I shall. Yes. 1 hour for witnesses and the remaining time for clause by clause. Mr. Baker, on this motion by Ms. Posey. I'm of the view that we should have 2 hours. We have a number of questions, and I think it would be time well spent to deal with all the questions that we may have before moving on to clause by clause.
Yeah, I think Madame Posbey's suggestion of 1 hour seems more reasonable than 2 hours. We've heard from the officials already. I guess the only new group that we're hearing from with this motion is the FCM. And it seems like we can then maybe keep those officials who are there for clause by clause in that same meeting.
Well, my understanding is that this extra meeting, extra hour, extra 2 hours, whatever it is, it's not for officials. It's for FCM and Mr. Davidson. But I've already said, we're going to invite the officials to be there for clause by clause. So whether they join in the second hour or at another meeting, I think they need to be there. And Mr. Albus.
Yeah, I just would say, Mr. Chair, a couple things. First of all, it's unfortunate this passed because unlike our usual process where all parties get to submit witnesses, this was jammed. So other parties like the Bloc and the NDP do not have a say in bringing forward their witnesses. Certainly, Mr. Davidson did a very good job representing his point of view and probably would appreciate the ability to speak to it. But I also would simply say that I really do hope that this doesn't become the example for other committees in doing private members' business. Usually we have a process for these kinds of things. And I guess now that it's out of the box, maybe the rules aren't so ironclad, and at other opportunities, other parties may try to do a shifke. Maybe that's what they'll call it down the road. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. But an hour, I think, is more than enough for Mr. Davidson and FCM to get their points across.
Okay, Mr. Shifke, on Ms. Monique Posey's,
yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Motion. Yeah.
I first want to say that if they use my name to refer to due diligence, I'll take it any day. And with that, I'd like to call the question.
Okay, so well, let's vote. So the motion is to. We've already agreed to do an extra meeting, but this motion says that meeting will be 1 hour for Mr. Davidson and the FCM, and 1 hour for clause by clause. And as I understand it, that's what we're voting on. Ms. Collins.
Well, I don't think we need to have a vote. I think we can have unanimous consent, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Collins. Okay, okay. Is there unanimous consent?
Mr. Chair, could you just repeat what you said?
Yeah, sure. Well, I don't have it in writing, but we're voting on Madame Posey's motion, which is that for this extra meeting that we've agreed to have based on the previous vote, that the first hour will be the FCM and Mr. Davidson, and the second hour will be clause by clause with the official. Well, Madame Posey didn't say with the officials present, but there's a unanimous consent around that, and we're going to invite them. So that's how it will play out. 1 hour with Mr. Davidson and the FCM, and then the next hour, clause by clause, with the officials present to answer, as Ms. McLeod said, to answer questions about potential impacts of amendments and so on. So that's what we're voting on, unless I've got it wrong. So is there a unanimous consent to doing it this way? Anyone object? Okay, so we'll have to schedule that. I don't know when we'll schedule it, but we'll schedule it. And Mr. Baker.
I move that we adjourn the meeting, Chair.
Okay, is there any objection? Oh, I've got Ms. Collins. No, Ms. Collins, yes. Ms. Collins.
I'm sorry, one moment.
You're on mute.
Isn't debatable, Chair.
No, it's not, but maybe it's a point of information. Is it a point of information? No, we can't debate this motion, but.
No.
Okay, Madame Posé, c'est une demande de renseignement parce qu'on a.
If it's a request for information, that's good, but an adjournment motion is not debatable.
Vous êtes en sourdine.
You're in mute. Well, I thought your hand was up. No, that's fine. That's fine. You want to speak? You have a question? No, I'm sorry. I wanted to ask, I presented 2 routine motions last time, and I think they should be acceptable on consensus. No, we are now seized by a motion to adjourn. Non-debatable. Mr. Clerk, I think, raised his hand. No? Yes? Yes? Go ahead. Yes, your legal clerk. As you've decided to have another meeting, you should put a deadline for any amendments so that the MPs would can do that. Okay, I'll discuss that with the clerk. Thanks for raising that issue.
Everyone's okay with adjourning? I don't see any negative.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Albus.
I would just simply say Monique Posé or Madame Posé has been very patient on waiting to bring her motions forward. And if we're not going to be doing clause by clause, I would rather give her the ability to put forward her motions and be heard by this committee. I think it's really shameful that we continue to disrespect other members of the committee that have brought up motions and have talked to people about those.
Yes, in other words, in advance of scheduling the next meeting on C204, you think that Madame Posé and others who have tabled motions.
We just had a motion to adjourn the debate, or adjourn the meeting, pardon me.
Yeah, but that's what you're saying essentially. Okay, so I have more hands, but it's got to be just questions, points of information. We can't have a debate. So I've got Madame Posé.
Je voulais juste dire.
Well, I was going to vote against adjournment, that's all. But you may well do that.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to suggest a vote on the adjournment motion, and I agree with my colleague, Mr. Albus.
Okay. So we've called the vote, but this is just points of information, Mr. Baker, Mr. Shifke. Go ahead, Mr. Baker.
Chair, I was going to withdraw my motion to adjourn to allow Madame Posé to.
Well, I don't think you can do that. I don't think we can, unless I'm wrong, I don't think we can withdraw a motion to adjourn. So I think we're just going to have to vote unless I'm told.
Can I get unanimous consent to withdraw?
Well, Madam, yes, unanimous. Sorry, now you've got my confused. Unanimous. You want to withdraw your motion to adjourn?
Correct.
Is there unanimous consent to withdraw the motion to adjourn?
Yes.
So we no longer have a motion to adjourn. We want to keep going. Okay. So what do you want to talk about?
Je pense que c'était pour donner la chance à Madame Posé de mettre de l'avant ses motions.
I think we'd like to give Madame Posé an opportunity to present her motions. Okay, very good. Mr. Albus.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just before we go to that, I do think it would be helpful just to have some idea on timing of this yet to be determined meeting. Is that going to be at your call, or are we going to be stenciling it in?
No, I think I'll have to discuss it with the clerk, and I intend to work with the clerk and figure this out.
Okay.
Madame Posé.
Madame Posé. Well, first of all, I want to thank my colleagues. I had presented motions. There was a report that was put forward that the interpreters, because of the virtual situation, they're running into different problems. Sound quality, inadequate equipment in some cases, and 2 motions were tabled. One was dealing with technical tests with witnesses, that each witness be informed that they should appear a little bit early so that they can run some audio sound checks in order to ensure the connectivity and the equipment used in order to ensure the best quality possible, and that the chair inform the committee at each meeting that there have to be these tests. So these technical tests will be done with the witnesses, but well before the 15 minutes prior. It could be 24 hours ahead of time to ensure that the witnesses are clear on the concept, that they have the right equipment, and it's a matter of safety and security for the interpreters. And the second motion, I think we could, Mr. Shifke? No? Wait a minute. I thought I saw a hand go up, but it's no longer there. Shall we vote on the motion? It seems to be consensus. I don't really see that there'd be any opposition. Seeing no opposition, Mr. Albus?
I just was going to simply say that that we support this. So let's just move on. Maybe we have unanimous consent.
We have unanimous consent. I don't see any objections. Deuxième motion, Madame.
Go ahead with your second motion, please, Madame Posey. Yes, thank you. The second motion, that all documents presented in the deliberations that do not come from a federal department or which have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be submitted to a linguistic revision by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to the members. Now, when it comes from a department, generally speaking, the translations accompany and the translation is good. If it's a witness, it either is not translated or it's been sort of artisanally translated. Mr. Albus.
You're on mute.
Pardon me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like just to propose, hopefully it will be a friendly amendment just to speed up the process. If not, I can make it a formal one, is that just adding on right after from a federal department, comma, members' offices, or that have not been translated. So I'm just adding that small bit just after federal department, comma, members' offices. And we just want to ensure that all documents coming from our MP offices are not delayed due to a mandatory linguistic revision.
Madame Posey, est-ce que vous
Would you accept that as a friendly amendment? Okay, very well, thank you. Once again, I think that there's probably consensus on this motion, apparently. So, seeing no...
Madame Collins?
I just want to reiterate the request. I know you folks are probably working on it, but just to get a visual, just when there are amendments to amendments, like in this case, I just want to make sure that I'm voting on the right thing.
Sure. No, absolutely, yeah.
And so just to reiterate the request, if there's some way for our clerk team or audiovisual folks to try and get a visual of when we're amending motions.
Yeah, I've spoken to the clerk and excuse me, analysts about that. It's doable. It makes yes. In this case, I thought it was pretty simple, so we could do it all verbally. But I think you're right, because I've brought it up and I agree that sometimes, especially when we were doing, for example, the ZEV study on recommendations, got very confusing. So I agree. We're working on something but this was sort of more. I mean, Madame Posey's original motion was on paper, but this change is very simple. So I mean, we could always reread the motion if you'd like.
That's okay. I just because I'm toggling between screens, I heard Mr. Albus add in from members' offices. I'm just trying to make sure it's in the right spot that would make sense to exempt them. And
So if something comes from the government department, if something has been translated by translation, like a brief from a witness, and it's been distributed, they both should be fine. And Mr. Albus just said, well, we should include members' offices whereby their materials, if they're submitted in both official languages, do not need to be reviewed because it could slow the process of
Perfect. Thank you.
So I think there's agreement around this, that if there's anyone who's objecting, please manifest that objection. If not, I consider the motion adopted. Both motions of Madame Posey. Okay, does anyone have a motion to adjourn?
Monsieur le Président,
I would like to thank once again the members of the committee for their consideration and made good use of the last minutes of our meeting. Thank you. Well, you put forward two good motions. Would someone like to move adjournment, please? Okay. We'll see each other again next week, Wednesday at 3:30. Thank you and good evening to all. Thank you all. Meeting adjourned.